Okay, I wanted to share some quick thoughts. Some of these themes will be rehashes, and hopefully you're not sick of hearing it, but I think this is a new facet and it's worth sharing. I'll try to be brief here. So let's reconstruct how I got here, the short story anyway, for the topic directly at hand. I was curious to see how a Google search would represent some form of the question, why do high school boys look younger today than they used to? Maybe I'll give some backstory as to how I came to that. But um, one reason I was looking at this, and here's important point number one, I don't know if you've noticed this, but certain questions are absolutely curated. The answers to certain questions are absolutely curated when you search them. And sometimes when I'm curious about this, I'll come to a question whose answer I know. Maybe from my scientific background, maybe from research I've done in the literature, maybe from some other thing. And I try to focus on questions that have pretty clear answers that people ought to know. But typically, these things are politically or socially charged, and so I'm interested to see how things go. And maybe I'll switch words around and change maybe the contrapositive or something of whatever I'm looking at, just to see how rigged it is. And sure enough, it's very rigged. So, for example, an example of this along gender lines is if you Google things around attractive men versus Googling things around attractive women, what you'll find is that it's much easier to get to what you're actually asking for with searching for attractive men, whereas if you search for something related to attractive women, like something like what's what do men look like on a 1 to 10 attractive scale, right? You'd expect that there are people out there who for some reason have put together 10 pictures or sets of pictures from 1 to 10. And these search engines will take you there very quickly for men. But for women, it's this huge thing of, oh, it's just a social concept. There's no such thing as 1 to 10 for women. Anyway, so you can see things like this. You can look up crime statistics for different demographics. You can look up all sorts of things and see this. And so I like to keep appraised of this because language co-opting, information control, these are very significant problems. But anywho, so I searched this for, I guess, delayed onset of masculine traits in men. And if you follow the stuff that I've been up to, you know, from time to time I'll post something on my blog or a video about testosterone declines. Now there are scientists, and the most prominent one's female. There are scientists who spent their careers looking at this, endocrinologists, who studied how these effects are taking place over time. And long story short, they've documented a 1% drop in male testosterone per year. And one of the many scary highlights of this research is that, for instance, because of this residual decline, young men, forgive the imprecision here, young men around 21 today have the same testosterone rates on average as 62-year-old men today. So that's how fast it's declining. And if you don't think that that has an effect, well, you're probably very young. But if you're older and you remember the average quality of men 20 years ago, 30 years ago, maybe longer than that ago, you'll potentially agree that something's very wrong, and you'll see a whole lot of explanations for a whole lot of things today that are jacked up. So this should be a pretty easy answer, okay? Why do high school males look a lot younger today than they did 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago? Well, if you dig, you'll find some people saying, yes, this is for sure true. I'm 75 years old, and here's some pictures from my lifetime. Here's my high school class. Here's my son's high school class, senior class. Here's my grandson's senior class. Or people who say, like, in my high school, they had pictures of every senior class from 1932 until now, and there's an absolute trend starting around the 70s. You see things like this, but they're rare because the vast majority of information that search engines will send you to will say that there is no difference. It's just social factors or whatever, like you're just imagining it, or it's because of good things. Well, we have better nutrition, so people look like they're aging slower, and blah, blah, blah. And it's also this shift to it's not just a male situation, it's just society in general. Everybody's better off. Okay. If you dig, you'll get to a study, which I'm going to post in the description here, or I'll pin it on a comment. You should look at it. The summing it all up, it turns out that there's all kinds of chemicals in this is a peer-reviewed paper. There are all kinds of chemicals in the water, in the food, in the air, but most of it is what you consume, water and food. And it turns out that they've done many studies on these chemicals, and the government only regulates like 5 of them, which is a paltry share of the full list. And in fact, the government puts them in water, for instance. And sure enough, these things cause all kinds of fertility problems. We know that's an issue for men and women today. All kinds of puberty problems in males. So they have studies on humans, they have studies on non-human mammals, on fish. And so anyway, it turns out that it massively disrupts testosterone and estrogen in men and women. And a lot of the problems for women are concentrated on fertility, and the problems with men range fertility and testosterone levels, which obviously significantly affects how you look, right? Masculine features are what we're talking about, and they develop after the onset of puberty in men, just like feminine features develop in women after the onset of puberty, and in females, I should say, as they become women. So, so this is a pretty cut and dry case, and so that's a little scary. That we live in this sea of data, unprecedented amounts of information at unprecedented low cost, and yet so much of it is not true, and so much of it is buried beneath all kinds of things that normal people would not know to go through, right, to get to the answer. Anyway, one of the reasons I decided to hop on here and make this video is because, okay, now we're going to get to the last 2 things that I think I'm going to talk about. We'll see if there's more. One, I know that when you start looking under the rug where all the dust is swept, you start to see this overwhelming pile of problems, and you say, like, man, there's so much out there. How do I know what I should worry about and where I should focus my limited resources? I think things that absolutely impact your children's ability or your ability to have children, that's a big deal. To live a healthy life, not just I'm going to live an extra 3 years kind of healthy, so I die when I'm 93 instead of 90, but actually be a functional male versus not, or to be a fertile female or not. That's a big deal, That's a big deal. So it turns out that even though these chemicals are kind of in everything today, there are practical ways that aren't overwhelming for you to do something about it. Now, the best thing you could do is to move to a place where you have water that comes out of a well. So I mentioned that governments put chemicals in the water that cause these effects. They include chlorine. So if you get municipal water, odds are it's treated with chlorine. You can taste it if it is, for the most part. Odds are that they add fluoride to the water. A lot of places out west, they get water from the mountains, and that can be fluoridated naturally. So I used to live in Provo. They would send Utah, so they'd send us, the city would send us these notices, I think it was annually, of the water quality. I have no idea if they do this anymore. But Provo's water comes out of the mountains. It contains more fluoride than most cities have who add it. And Provo adds even more into it. So I'm not really sure what that's about, but that's what they do. And then that's in addition to things like plastics. I'm just sort of summing a bunch of different chemical categories, but plastics, or any place where the water's recycled, which is quite common east of the Mississippi. So if you have some sort of water treatment plant, it's really gross, but they're recycling the sewage, and you're drinking it in your city water, probably not a place you want to live, right? Any of those categories are, if you know, according to this paper, all of those categories of places to live, they're going to be, your drinking water is going to contain lots of these things. And the thing with hormone disrupting chemicals is that they are effective at very low doses. So hormones are serious things. So look, if the option is to move to the countryside, by the way, a lot of these things are also in the air. So if you live in a city, you're breathing plastic all day long. It's tiny. They're called microplastics. You're not going to notice it in your actual breathing or daily circumstances, but you're going to experience these long-term effects of reduced fertility and lower testosterone if you're male. Reduced fertility for both and lower testosterone for men at an earlier age. So, and then this will be most noticeable for boys who are going through puberty, because it's not going to work right. They're not going to actually go through full puberty. That's the thing. It's not just a delay. It just never happens fully. It's messed up on multiple levels, and that's why you get these soy boys. That's what it's the environment. That's what's causing this. So anyway, that's overwhelming to tell someone, well, you need to sell everything and move. Sell your house, change your job, move. And I told you years ago that it was time to move, and hardly anyone did anything about it. And I told you that it was going to become harder and that the cost was going to get higher, and that happened. And I told you it was going to continue to happen, and it's continuing to happen. And so now a lot of people are saying, well, I can't do anything about it now because I would lose so much money selling my house and then, say, getting a new mortgage at a much higher interest rate, or buying a house at a much higher cost of living now. It wasn't 5 years ago, but a much higher cost of living place. Yep. And guess what? The consequences are going to continue to stack, and the situation is just going to get worse when you finally do it. But I've repeated that ad infinitum, so here's the good news. For this particular consequence, it's not exactly equivalent, but you can get maybe 90% of the benefit. I'm not pulling that number out of thin air. Several of these chemicals, that's the effective rating for what this does, but I'm suggesting you buy a water filter, and not just any, specifically a reverse osmosis water filter. It's got to be that. Can't just be this lower cost Brita filter you screw onto your faucet. It's an actual system They don't cost a ton. I've installed several of them. If you're handy, it's no big deal. If you're not, it's probably impossibly difficult for you, but whatever. Life is hard. So you can get these things installed, or you can install them yourself. You can buy them at Lowe's or Home Depot. It's not a big deal. It'll make your water taste way better. So that's nice. You'll notice that right away. The cartridges aren't cheap to replace, but you don't have to do it very often. You probably don't want to put this on your whole house because those cartridges will last very, very little time. But normally what people do is they just have a little, you may have seen them before, a special faucet by their sink or something, and that is the filtered water. And so for your drinking water, that's what you do. So you buy that, you install that, you're 90% there. Now you're still showering with this, you're still exposed to the air, but it's a huge positive change for not that much cost. Okay, and final point with this. This is a wonderful example of this principle of good choices having cascading positive consequences. It's impossible to know all of the good that's going to come out of a good decision. It's also impossible to know all of the bad that's going to come out of a bad decision. But what we always have is enough to know which one's better. We always have enough to know which one is better. It's available to us. We can figure it out with the resources that are made available, that we have at hand. And the problem is when folks make decisions, instead of saying which one's better, I'm going to go for it 100%. They say, well, how much better is it? Yeah, that doesn't seem better enough to justify the change. 5 years ago when I said, hey, move to a rural area if you don't live in one. More recently, but still years ago, when I said, it's time to find a place that you'd like to be in the event that everything falls apart. People are like, wow, that's a really extreme thing. I'm not doing that. I could. It obviously would be better. It would be better if my kids could go outside and play without me having to stand there armed in case hoodlums come by or whatever. It'd be better to have a garden, sure. I mean, that'd be nice. But, we're comfortable here. I don't feel like a change. I'm used to my routine, whatever. I like my neighbors. I live by my brother-in-law and he's cool, whatever. Well, I don't want to face my wife. I don't want to face my husband on this. They're going to fight me on it. My kids don't want to change high schools or friends, whatever the excuse was. Well, now you're here. Your kids are a couple years older. Your sons look like girls, probably have a host of other issues, and it's your fault. If you heard the message years ago and the consequences are rolling out, it's your fault. So now what are you going to do about it? And you're going to find this happens wave after wave after wave going forward. I just saw while I'm on here, slightly related but basically different topic. I don't make videos where I'm like, let me go back to the things I said and show you how it's right, show you the evidence that these things have happened. That's not something I'm going to make my job. That's a little too much. Someone else can do that if they'd like to, whatever. But I just see them and I move on. But there's news article after news article after news article. If you've been paying attention, you see them. The most recent one the other day, the Democrats in the House decided to propose a 1,000% tax on guns. I'm not making this up. You can look it up. I've heard this idea before. Heard it years ago, years and years ago. in a slideshow. It's on this channel. It's called When the Figs Appear. I'm sorry, When the Leaves Appear on the Fig Tree, Summer is at Hand, something like that. And it's right there. Higher taxes on guns and ammo. So my wife asked me, do you think this is going to go through? I said, don't know, don't care. You see, this is another principle is people don't realize if folks can get away with just proposing insane things, we're already done. That's in that case, there's no going back. It's just a question of how long it takes, right? No one's going to pay $20,000 for a rifle. That's no normal person is going to do that. They're already outrageously expensive. A nice rifle. Anyway, in the ammo, that if I'm surprised by anything, it's that they didn't go for the ammo first, because maybe that's coming next. But a huge tax on the rifle only stops people who don't have them yet. You put a huge tax on the ammo, you get everybody who's already got one. And I know there are a lot of people who have a truckload of ammo in their basement somewhere. In some cases, okay, fine, whatever. But in others, ammo doesn't last forever. It can corrode. The primer system can stop working. That's not a foolproof solution. And again, it doesn't help anybody who doesn't have it already. But, you know, bullets costing $1 or more a piece, that's a great way to cut down on how many people have them, or creating artificial shortages, which they were doing a few years ago by issuing these enormous contracts to the private manufacturers. Anyway, maybe one more thing for today, and I need to move on with my day. I have a lot to do. Medical decisions. This is going to end up being a full-blown here's what's coming next video, and I don't want to do that. But, well, medical decisions is another one that I told you about. And then the COVID vaccine requirements came along in so many places, in so many ways, but now there are states. There was a state recently, and I can't remember which one it was, but a state recently said that they're revoking religious exemptions for vaccine requirements for schooling. And of course, parents are up in arms and they're fighting it. But, you know, do you want to be in a place where significant changes to the way you'd like to live your life are subject to the capricious whim of a bunch of politicians, the current crop, whoever they are? So if you live in a state where that's on the docket, maybe you should move, especially if you're one of the many people who are not going to homeschool their kids for whatever reason. Because when it comes down to it, your choice is going to be subject your kids to these things that you don't think are a good idea, and you have your reasons, or you have to move, right? Do you want to do that last minute in like a sudden burst, or do you want to get your ducks in a row? Because the longer you wait on these things, the harder they get. And I'm not sure how much clearer I can say that. And it's falling on deaf ears. But, oh well. See, the consequences are going to hit you whether you listen to me or not. So, and I shouldn't say listen to me, listen to reason. And those aren't the same, just to clear that up. But, you know, you don't need a guy telling you, hey, if you're in a state where people are hostile to the things that are important to you, maybe you should move to a different state. Or if you can't, just know that this is on the horizon and prepare yourself however you can, even if that's just mentally. I'm in a place where this is where I'm supposed to be. I know that, but the place I live does not have the ideal demographic in my book. I don't think any place does at this point, at least for my standards, but you know, there are a lot of issues with places, so you kind of have to just think about that. But I'm on a well. I got no problems there. We have very clean air here. except for when there are forest fires, which is also a man-made problem, but not in the way that those people will tell you. I always wonder, now we're really ranting, the feds spend billions and billions and billions of dollars per year on firefighting. I put that in air quotes because, at least around here, it seems like all they do is let it burn. But I wonder how much they'd have to spend to deploy a redneck brigade out into the woods, to just say, look, we've cordoned off this grid, and we want anybody who wants to come cut down any dead standing timber and haul it out of the woods, and we'll pay you this much per cord over these 5 days or something. And for pennies on the dollar, if that, they could clear out these forests of all the dead standing logs, and they don't do it. And then they could just say, whoever wants free firewood, it's right here, come pick it up. And that's a win-win, right? But whatever. All right, testosterone, it's important. And if you're in a place where you're not on a well, maybe you should get a reverse osmosis water filter. See ya.